Okay, welcome everyone to Let Me Tell You Why That's Bullshit. Today we're diving into the big news. Mark Carney's big win as Liberal leader, sworn in just yesterday. We'll break down what's happening, what it means, and most importantly, if it's more of the same. Then we'll take a hard look at the latest polls, who's up, who's down, and who should probably just pack it in. I'm looking at you, Jagmeet Singh. And finally, we'll wrap up with some headlines. Spoiler alert, they suck. So buckle up because we're not holding back today.
We have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now.
How are you doing, Rio?
I'm alive. So seeing Mark Carney's selection as Liberal leader was like hilarious, and we'll talk more about that later. But 86% of the polls in his whole party, and what was it? Chrystia Freeland got 8%, and then the last 6% was split between the last two. So fantastic. That was a great result. It looked funny, and I was like, that looks awful for Freeland, but it's hilarious. So
not really surprising, right?
Yeah.
We've been saying it for weeks now, right? They would be stupid not to vote in Carney.
Yeah. And
clearly they followed through on that in really high numbers.
Yeah. And I was kind of joking with my girlfriend about this a little while ago. I was like, it's kind of funny that Chrystia Freeland, the person who started all of this, polled at 8% within her party. So I was like, wow, you really thought that you could pull that one off, huh? You thought you could blow up the government, that they'd pick you right after. It's like, no, that was a pretty ballsy move, but kind of a dumb move.
It's kind of annoying. She's the only one he left in cabinet too.
Yeah.
Because he kicked out Karina.
Yep.
She's no longer in cabinet. He demoted her majorly. She's transport and industry.
Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah, it's transport
and internal trade.
Internal trade, that was it. Minister, which
is important, especially now, but at the same time,
it's a demotion though. Yeah, it's a huge demotion within cabinet. But I don't know. He also put her in charge of internal trade. Yep. Which means they're probably going to start going after the provincial barriers to free trade across Canada, which is great, but you're going to give her that super important portfolio.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think this could come back to bite him in the ass later.
Yeah. Putting Freeland back in a cabinet position was probably a poor choice. And there probably were other people he could have chosen that would have been if not the same, then better for the role. But
and see, here's my thing with it. And we'll get into the asset stuff later. But he, if we look back, if we go back to the campaign, Chrystia Freeland did an interview with The Rest is Politics US with not Anthony Scaramucci. No, sorry, she did the British one. And she was talking to them, and she let it slip that her and Carney aren't only good friends, he's the godfather to one of her kids. And so I don't want to dwell too much on this because I still think he's better for Canada than Poilievre.
Yep.
But ethically speaking, he kicked out Gould from the cabinet. He didn't offer any cabinet positions to anybody else that was running in leadership, which kind of makes sense. Bayless is an elected official, and I don't think he's going to run for election. Who else was in there? See, I can't even remember the other people. There was the three of them.
Yeah.
But then he gives Freeland, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a pretty textbook conflict of interest, right? Because you have that very personal connection.
It's icky, right? It just feels like you're helping your friend.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to it's probably something we don't need to dwell on too much because obviously she is she's qualified. She was finance minister. She was deputy minister or deputy prime minister, sorry. Which something he got rid of, so yay.
Yeah.
but I don't know. It just feels icky to me. I know that it's going to be a transitional cabinet, right? Like they'll probably announce that we're heading into an election next week.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just like that struck me as icky. I don't know.
Yeah, which makes sense because it absolutely should. Because we've been talking like, if we look south of the border to the Trump administration, we've been talking about nepotism, right? Where like he has his family all over the damn place. He's like connected with all these like tech billionaires and all that crap, right? So, even a friendship can be a conflict of interest. And that's just one of those situations where it's like, oh yeah, that's a little bit ethically not cool, Carney, but at the same time, like it does make sense because she did hold that position as deputy prime minister and minister of finance. But yeah,
well, let's keep an eye on it.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Like, I mean, for all we know, maybe things get better. Like he already axed consumer carbon tax, but let's see. More on that later.
Yeah, so he was sworn in as prime minister yesterday. He gave a really quick, like 5-minute speech and then took 15 minutes of questions. Now, one of the first interesting things that came out of this is, and I guess this goes to having an election, which he was specifically asked later on, and we can talk about that. Well, no, let's talk about it now. We'll skip that part. So he was asked, are we going to go into an election? And his response was, we will have an election at some point before November 15th or before November, and the news of the day is behind me. So he really didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm still like very much in this, like he's obviously going to call an election. He's not going to want to deal with like Singh and all of that crap and have like the unelected prime ministership hanging over his head. Plus we'll see when we get to the poll section that he's riding high right now. So it'd be really stupid not to go into an election.
Yeah.
But one thing that struck me, I don't know if you managed to watch the question period yet, but he was asked about what's kind of top of his agenda right now. And apparently he's going to France next week to talk about expanding our trade with Europe, which is great. But it does call into question. So like, are we going to go into an election right away? Or is he going to wait like a week, deal with that, and then come back and call an election? Like that was a red flag to me.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird choice to go out and like start doing foreign relations right away. But at the same time, okay, so for me, I kind of see it as it makes sense to do, especially in the face of, Donald Trump threatening to annex Canada, right? So like, it makes sense to start building up these relationships and be like, okay, look, we want to put this on the table. Like we're probably going into an election within the next month. Like Carney's a smart dude. He's not dumb. He knows probably what he's doing, as I'm assuming, right? Like you don't become governor of the Bank of Canada if you're a fucking idiot. So,
yeah, he has really good relationship with Europe.
Yeah.
It came out somewhere. I haven't fact checked this yet, but it did. Actually, I can do it live while we're talking. Somebody was saying that he has a UK citizenship.
Yeah, I think I saw that. I want to say CBC. Well,
Irish and UK citizenship.
Wow, triple citizenship.
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna get rid of those, obviously, as being Prime Minister of Canada. But the reason I bring it up is because he has 3 citizenships. He was the governor of the Bank of England during the Brexit stuff. And so he and we talked about this before, right? Like he was doing all of these interviews with like European media while ignoring Canadian media. So he does have really good relationships with Europe.
Yep.
So in terms of like trade partner and expanding and diversifying beyond the US, I think he's probably the better choice if I had to pick between Polyev, who's too busy saying Trumpian things and standing behind a Canada First sign and complaining about Carney leadership, which we'll get into a little bit later. So I don't know. It makes sense, but also I was just like, why are we talking about this right now? Call an election. That's what people want. You're riding high.
Yeah, you have a solid chance in the polls anyway, and like Jagmeet Singh's tanking, so like you're probably going to be fine,
right? So that was just kind of weird to me. From there, he was asked about, this is really funny. Let me pull this up because I have a clip. I will just share my screen. On the Rubio stuff. So did you hear about this at all this week? So Marco Rubio was in Quebec for something related to the G7, which is up and coming, and was asked about Trump's 51st state rhetoric. So let's just watch this clip really quick.
Crazy. His point is crazy. That's it.
And frankly, the way that gets solved is Canada should honestly become our 51st state. We wouldn't have a northern border problem. We wouldn't have a tariff problem.
He says he loves Canada. He says he made an argument for why Canada would be better off joining the United States from an economic perspective and the like. He's made that argument repeatedly. And I think it stands for itself.
En tant que Premier ministre, qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ces propos du secrétaire d'État américain tenu en sol canadien?
Ah. C'est fou, hein? C'est fou. C'est simple, c'est fou. Point final.
En anglais?
It's crazy. His point is crazy. That's it.
Yeah, I saw that one. And like, you know what? That's really all it boils down to, is that it really is just crazy. Like, only, and this is just, again, someone who like knows Duolingo French. Like, I understood it. So like, clearly it's working. Like, he can understand, like, he can now speak enough of the language. So, well, but more always helps, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. C'est fou, c'est simple, c'est fou. Like, I get it.
I just like, for me, it's kind of refreshing, right? Like, Trudeau was very like diplomatic, and there's no way he would have just come out and said like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So I do like that Carney is coming out and not pulling any punches. And we'll see later when he talks about Trump.
Yeah.
He basically says like, the US needs to start respecting us.
Yeah.
And like, even these remarks, like Rubio made them in Quebec. He came onto Canadian soil and was defending annexing our country.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Somebody in the comments last week said that the TDS, which is Trump derangement syndrome, is strong with us. I'm just wondering, like, how are these people still like, oh, it's just Trump derangement syndrome? Like, are they not paying attention? Rubio just came onto our fucking soil and was like, yeah, we should annex your country. But I'm the one that has TDS?
Yeah. Like, we're being called crazy for being like, no, maybe Canada should be a sovereign country, right? You know, the way it has been since 1867. Like, it's very telling that like the rhetoric will very easily go like, oh, well, you're fucking crazy just because Trump got elected. He's not going to do all this stuff. Oh, he's just joking. Yeah. It's like, I mean, people literally saw Elon Musk throw Nazi salutes, and everyone's like, no, he's just throwing his heart out to the crowd. And like, if I did that in public, I'd get the shit beat out of me, right? Like, why is that suddenly okay for some people to do, but then for the average person, it's like, nope, still can't do that, right? And like, it's that double standard.
Not even that, right? It's just Trump and his
fucking cronies.
Can you imagine if like Biden did even like a fraction of what Trump has done or said?
Yep.
Like, he would have just been like hauled out of the White House. And you could bet that even Democrats would impeach his ass.
Yep.
But instead, we have Republicans that are running scared of this.
Scared and fucking spineless, by the way.
And, by the way, we will talk more about this later, but back to the Trump derangement syndrome. Trump literally gave a speech this week where he said that his opponents should be imprisoned. So I'll let you sit with that for the next half hour before we get to it.
And he also said any negative news about him should be completely illegal. Like,
but the TDS is strong with us.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a government who's openly planning to censor its own people, and you're like, no, these guys are fucking crazy. No, your president came out and said that, like, word for goddamn word.
And it's like every day, it's just something new, right? So I do appreciate, like, getting back to Carney, like, as a Canadian, I don't want to see any more of this, like, diplomatic bullshit where people are like, oh, it's just Trump being Trump, don't worry about it. Like, no, the guy wants to take over a fucking country and be a king of America while putting opponents in prison. You know who else puts opponents in prison? Putin.
Yep. And while we're at it,
decides not to poison them.
yeah, don't forget about Xi Jinping, who also did that to, what was it? It was the former Chinese prime minister as well. Like, yeah, these aren't good people. It's happened in every autocracy, right? Like,
there's almost like it's a playbook.
Yeah, weird. There's a dictator's handbook out there.
So with that said, yesterday Carney focused a lot on like internal trade and dealing with different partners abroad. So I was really I was happy to hear that. Something else interesting that came sort of out of the rumor mill that I saw on CBC yesterday, I think it was Power and Politics, but it might have been Rosemary Barton's show. I can't remember. I've watched a lot of shit in the last 24 hours. But rumor has it that he's thinking of running in Alberta. And now I wanted to talk about this. He was asked about it yesterday. In the question period, but he wouldn't answer it. He just said that like he grew up in Alberta and the news of the week is behind him. I wasn't too thrilled with how he's like just directly gonna gaslight media at this point and be like, no, I'm not talking about that. But this whole him running in Edmonton thing, and we'll see why, like when I bring up the poll stuff later, but it's a little bit, I don't want to say concerning because that's not really the right word, but like in the polls, 35 out of 37 of the seats in Alberta right now are leaning heavily Poilievre, which is actually like super interesting considering Edmonton consistently votes NDP in the provincial elections. So that's kind of interesting. We'll see what happens in Edmonton, but I don't know. I guess I wanted your take on this because if he runs in Edmonton, Edmonton is solidly blue except for 2 seats. So is he going to run in that like liberal leaning riding and boot out that liberal candidate? Or I don't know. Like,
I mean,
he's taking a risk here if he's going to run in Alberta.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say because it's a huge risk, right? Because Alberta has been like, okay, we had our first NDP government in 2015, right? And that was after like 45 plus years of like only conservative governments. And, that's shifted a little bit more since 2015. And like, yeah, we got back to a conservative government in 2019, but like, there's still a lot more of that like positive NDP sentiment. But like, that's not going to translate to a federal election because like people in Alberta hate the word liberal. Like I showed you a picture of this before we hopped on like the recording, but like there are literally people with like, the fuck Trudeau stickers, like the classic Alberta thing, but now making swastikas out of it, right? So like it's not a good idea, I'd say. For me, I'd say it's the smarter play to run somewhere like Ontario, that typically votes liberal, or like, maybe somewhere in Manitoba or BC where it makes a little bit more sense, because it's going to be really hard to break a conservative hold on Alberta, because like 50 years of history doesn't just go away because it's Mark Carney who was born and raised in Alberta. Like I get it, like I was born and raised in Alberta too, but like that doesn't change the fact that I don't politically align with most of Alberta.
So what's interesting is he was actually born in the, I want to say Northwest Territories. Yeah.
Close enough to Alberta.
And then, yeah, so he was like born in the Northwest Territories, and then when he was quite young, they moved to Alberta. So like I am sympathetic to the whole I want to run where home is.
Yeah.
But then run in the Northwest Territory, I don't know. Like I just feel like it's super risky because if he runs here, and even if the Liberals win, but he doesn't win in Alberta, that's going to be like Poilievre is going to have a field day with us having like not only an unelected prime minister, but like a prime minister who lost the election in his riding.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they have people on it and they're like researching and the one Liberal seat in Alberta is probably like really, really strong, and I'm sure it would be fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, I feel like it's super risky, and maybe they would want to play it more safe, and maybe that's why they like aren't announcing it yet either, because people are actively trying to talk about
running in Alberta. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, Polyev would have an absolute field day with like, oh well, you lost the election in your riding, but you're still prime minister because, right? But
that's our
yeah, that's the system though. Like, it's served Canada since 1867. So
I mean, what would happen is he'd probably just run in a by-election, but you know that Polyev would be like, you need to resign and hold another Liberal leadership.
yeah, and then hold another election, because why not make Canada the most unstable democracy on the planet for a second time? Which, fun fact, last time that happened was under Stephen Harper, where we had like, what, 6 elections in the span of like 2 years?
And he broke Parliament twice to get elections. Yeah. Which Polyev has just like conveniently forgot.
Yep.
Which is actually another thing that you bring Harper up. Carney is still leaning into when Harper was behind me when I was governor of Bank of Canada. So I feel like that's something to watch during the elections too. I wonder just how much he's going to lean into Harper to try to like pull the Conservative vote, and I guess this, like, it doesn't worry me in terms of the election much, because we see a lot of people leaving the NDP to basically vote for anything but Conservative. But Carney isn't, like, he's Liberal-ish, but he's more of like
he's a red Tory.
Yeah, like he's absolutely a red Tory. He is an economist, a conservative. Actually, here's another rumor from the week that so far news agencies haven't been able to corroborate, but it's something to watch. Apparently, he was approaching conservative MPs to see if they would be interested in serving in a future cabinet.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see like a Liberal leader with conservative MPs in the cabinet. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it, but like,
it's an interesting tactic, especially going into an election.
Yeah, right. Like, so I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know how much there is to that, because he's friendly with conservatives, right? Just because he's a red Tory. So I don't know if the media is like misunderstanding things.
Yeah.
But like, that's sort of an interesting prospect. Like, I'm always for those types of things, but could you imagine like he gets Liberal leadership and then starts bringing conservative MPs into the cabinet? Like, I think that would cause, at the very least, like ruffled feathers within the party, and at worst
we end up with Pierre Poilievre with extra steps.
Yeah, like I feel like it would just be like that we'd have like infiltration conspiracy theories that would start cropping up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been quite interesting. He was also asked yesterday about Canadian identity. A French reporter kind of called him out on how he doesn't really talk about language when he talks about Canadian identity. And what he said was that he thinks that language is definitely at the center of identity, and Canadian is a bilingual country, but that Canadian identity is more than just French and English, and that we should be looking at culture, language, nature, and biodiversity. And then he spoke a little bit about like how biodiversity relates to a culture and identity of a country. And it was very Indigenous sounding.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite refreshing too, coming from a government leader at this point. And I think that goes back to his Northwest Territories roots.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to quickly, I think it was somewhere up there. I can't type. Mark Carney born. There. Yeah, Northwest Territories. And so I think that like that part was really coming through yesterday when he was talked about it. So I don't know. I guess I just wanted to like chat about this because it was really refreshing to hear a political leader actually talk more than just about like French and English, because you know, as an Albertan and somebody that doesn't speak French but like strives to understand the history behind like why Quebec is very like defensive about it, but at the same time I feel like Canadian, like he's not wrong, like Canadian identity does tend to get overshadowed by just like the French English debate.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of it is too, right? But he's right that identity is so much more than just your language. And then actually we saw a kind of interesting YouTube video about this, where if you really want to learn about a culture, you have to learn about its language, right? Because picking on Filipino, because about like Filipino languages, like they're highly relational. So like there's several, you have a verb, and then you have like several different words that like refer to the different relations of like how you're talking to people. So like if it's you and me, and I'm saying us inclusive, it's a different word versus us exclusive, right?
Mm.
And then so you have those kinds of changes. And then French is kind of similar because like, you know, you have you in like an informal sense, then you have you in a more formal sense, and then you have like they, or which also changes like if you're referring to like masculine or feminine, and then like we and us changes, and like the verbs change along with the words, right? So like, yeah, like language is a big part of it, and it is central to a lot of identities because it defines how you interact in your relationships with people, right? But I'm also totally with him that like, you know, I saw a clip on CBC this morning about like, yeah, you know, like kids up in Edmonton are just playing like ice hockey on the lake, and like, you know, that's about as Canadian as it gets. It's the national pastime. It's middle of February. You're just going to go play hockey in the lake. There's no goalkeepers. There's literally just like 2 sticks and then a bunch of kids with skates and sticks, right? So I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And with Canada too being like such a large country, we have that nature and biodiversity that make people like, it makes people come from Atlantic Canada to see the Rockies and vice versa. Because like, we're Albertans, we see the Rockies every day. It's like, you know, cool mountains. You know, as much as I love going to the mountains in the summer, it's still nice to go to like Vancouver or like Halifax and like you see the Atlantic Ocean. And actually, I have a friend. This is really interesting. He was mayor of Lunenburg until recently. I'm pretty sure he still is, but I'm not sure if he is anymore. But we were chatting the last time I was in Nova Scotia, and he was like, yeah, you know, it's always fun to like talk to people from like Alberta and Manitoba because they come here, they see the ocean, and they're like, wow, cool, that's so amazing. What's on the other side of it? And he looks at them, he's like, well, Spain. And then they're like, what? It's like, yeah, it's an ocean. There isn't an island like somewhere in the middle of it. You got to go to the next continent to see any land. And I was like, oh yeah, you know, like I never thought about that because like, you know, I'm from Alberta. I'm just like, yeah, you know, on the other side of the mountains there is BC. Like,
Yeah.
on the other side of the prairies is fucking Ontario. So
Yeah, that's funny. Okay. Let's move on to carbon tax.
Yep.
I'll just jump right into actually like playing this clip just because mostly I just thought it was funny. So we'll take a listen to this here.
Prime Minister Carney, first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
Second, David Baxter, Canadian Press. April 1st is fast approaching, the date the consumer carbon tax is set to increase once again. You've talked about getting rid of it. How are you going to do it in the next 2 weeks?
Your question, how are we going to do it by the end of the day? That's a great question. And we'll come right back to you on that following the cabinet meeting.
In order?
You have a better follow-up.
I just thought that was like a really funny way to announce the carbon tax is going away. And he actually did do it through an order in council, which affects regulations. And so I guess they were able to kill the carbon tax through an order in council yesterday, and it's officially dead.
Yep.
Not that gas stations around us appear to know that, because the gas price hasn't moved in the last 24 hours. This is interesting, right? Because, and we knew it was coming, and we knew it would come fast because Poilievre has been like an axe the tax election, which he's kind of dropped, but he's still calling him carbon tax Carney.
Yep.
But it does make me wonder, right? Because he is known as like, I think I would say the environment is why he's identified more with the Liberal Party than the Conservatives. Like, I think that's his issue, right? Like, if we look at what he's done, he's associated with the UN, with environmental targets, like economically. So I'm just kind of curious as to like what he's going to do, because it's not like they're going to do nothing. One of the things he talked about on The Rest is Politics US is taxing producers, which like is just going to result in the same thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, I don't know how this is going to play out, because I think, and we'll see later when we look at like issues for Canadians right now. Like, I think Trump's going to be if probably the deciding factor in the next election. But Poilievre's definitely going to try to make this carbon tax an issue, and he doesn't seem to be too like interested in being like, this is what I'm going to do. Although maybe he will say his policy to sort of get it out of the way. But I think I will be a little bit more wary if he doesn't, because if he doesn't put out his policy on carbon tax during the election, I think that's kind of everything you need to know, and that they would go producer, which, fun fact, is what the Conservatives were saying when this was all introduced. The Liberals should too. So that is a very like conservative way of looking at like, how do you deal with the environment? But like, it's not like that isn't going to get passed down to consumers anyway.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, like a producer will always have to pass that cost on. And that's why like tariffs are such a big deal. Just kind of tying it back to the thing we've been talking about for the last few weeks as well, is like, you know, the amount that you have to spend moving things back and forth, that cost moves on to the consumer. So like that Ford F-150 you could have bought, you know, say a year ago for like what, $82,000, you know, suddenly shoots up to $150,000 because of tariffs, because it has to cross the border 6 times before it's done, right? 7 if you can include the time that like it's finished in the States, shipped to a dealership in Alberta, and then like, you know, now you're paying just like super premiums on it, right? But to me, it kind of makes sense. Like the taxing the producer makes sense, right? Because you can tax the producer at a much lower rate than you would have to tax an individual to make up for the shortfall. So like it does kind of make a little bit of sense where it's like, okay, you know, you take that, you literally take the Conservatives' platform point away from them, and then you're saying like, okay, well, we agree on this. What else makes you different? So like politically, it kind of also makes a little bit of sense to randomly like kind of approach it that way. But I think with a lot of like what Mark Carney is doing, like you were saying, because of the like Northwest Territories, Northern Alberta kind of background, like having that perspective on like, no, the nature and biodiversity of the country is important and needs to be protected. That's where you get the red in the red Tory, right? So like, I think it'll be interesting to see, but he really does have to say his policy on it, because without knowing, you're going to have people going in and being like, well, he's another liberal. What's different, right?
Yeah. Speaking of Poilievre, the other thing Poilievre has gone after Carney for, which is actually really funny, because a few weeks ago or a couple of weeks ago, I don't know, everything seems longer than it is. But Poilievre was photographed playing ball hockey in the streets. And the funny thing about this is somebody online, I think it was Reddit, pointed out that the sneakers he was wearing was $2,000 sneakers. And the reason I bring this up is because, of course, Poilievre is going after Carney's relatability to regular people, right? And what's been coming up over and over again, even in the last couple of weeks with the media, is his assets. So I want to watch this. Quick clip where a reporter specifically asks him about it. And then we can kind of chat about it, because I think this is also going to be an election issue.
Hi, Prime Minister Carney. I'm Jillian Piper with Global News. I understand that your assets have been put into a blind trust. I wanted to ask you, what is the value of the assets and where did they come from? How can Canadians know that there's no conflict of interest if they don't know where the assets come from?
That's an odd question, or odd way of framing it. The assets are in a blind trust. Right. So, and can I point out that for those who don't follow this, I have 6 months to put, or 120 days to put the assets in a blind trust. I already have put the assets in a blind trust. And once assets are in a blind trust, you don't know, but by definition, you don't know the assets because the trustees take over the responsibility. I would like to reassure you that the assets that I have were earned through employment. Employment income, employment as a public servant, and employment in the private sector. And I would note as well that employment in the private sector is something that the leader of the opposition has never experienced. And I would as well that complying or meeting standards expected of a leader of a party, let alone a prime minister, is something that the leader of opposition is not respected either. And I'm speaking directly with respect to his refusal, still at a time of great crisis, to get his security clearance, something I managed to do in 2 weeks. En ce qui concerne mes actives.
Okay, just before you start talking, I love the straight up drive-by he does of like, oh yeah, by the way, I got my security clearance in 2 weeks. Why won't he do it? Because like I've written our MP about that multiple times and have never gotten a response. So like it's an issue that's important to me, right? It should be an issue that's important to Canadians because you have someone in Parliament who wants to form government who won't get a security clearance. And this is really frustrating and stupid. But I saw a YouTube comment earlier that was like, not on our channel, it's on CBC, and they're like, oh, well, he won't get the clearance because it comes with a gag order. I'm like, yeah, it's because it's called security clearance. You can't be leaking classified information. Like, you know, that's what makes you an asset to a foreign entity, right? Like,
Yeah, well, and like it's just interesting, right? So Poilievre's take on this is, what is he trying to hide?
I mean, my take on,
right? And then Carney's perspective is, well, what are you trying to hide? Like, what's in your past where you're scared to go get your security clearance, right? So yeah. I think we're going to see this play out in the election as well. Yeah. But I think this was a little bit of a swing and a miss too, because, and I don't know if this is just like he needs to get out of his economic brain and be more political. But to answer a reporter's question about his assets, which obviously she was asking, what did you put into the blind trust? Yeah. Like, we're not stupid. We know that a blind trust means you no longer know what those assets are because somebody is managing your portfolio for you. But clearly that question was, what were the assets that you put in there?
Yeah.
And this is also something that he just doesn't want to talk about.
It comes across as like or not transparent, opaque, right? Because it's the same thing. Because like, say hypothetically, if either of us ran for office, then we have to like make those declarations, right? Or like if you follow anything about the US stock market, you can literally see the trades that they make in, like, you know, it's delayed by a month, but you can see who's buying what. And like, you can always see, it's like, oh, you know, Nancy Pelosi buys this, you know, this Republican senator bought this. Like, you know, you can see that activity.
Yeah, that whole US thing is absolutely insane to me.
Yeah. And like, full disclosure, I follow the Nancy Pelosi strategy of like, well, she bought it, so I'm just going to buy it.
It's really funny. I want Apple, like, total side thing, but I would like Apple to keep falling so that I can buy some Apple stock.
Yeah.
I'm here for discounted stocks right now.
I mean, hey, we've lost $5 trillion in value in the last 2 months.
I just need a little bit more. Apple stock's at like 214 US, and I'm like, I just want it to be under 200, and then I'll buy some. Yeah. So that's been my week. But yeah, I don't know. I think that this is going to play in heavily in the next election. And I understand, because there probably is stuff in there, right? Like, yeah. I don't know, he's probably got like AI chip stock and who the hell else, right? Like, there's probably clearly some stuff in there that you could look at and be like, yeah. So I guess yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
This is an economist with like 20 years of experience, right? So like, this is someone who knows money, like inside and out. So you know that he's looked at the market and been like, yep, this is probably it, which is also probably why he doesn't want to talk about it too much. So I can totally understand like the perspective, like, well, I don't want to talk about it because like Also, and maybe this is me being a little bit weird, but I kind of get why he wants to keep it private.
Yeah.
Right? But as a public servant, he should really disclose it. So
Yeah.
like on the bright side, though, at least he already put it in a blind trust, and it's like,
I mean, yeah, right. Like his ethics speak pretty loudly. On the Rest is Politics US, he or no, not that. Sorry, no. Sorry, it was with Rosemary Barton Live the next day. He mentioned offhandedly that Harper wanted him to be his finance minister. And he was like, oh, I turned him down because I didn't think it would be ethical. And of course, Rosemary like immediately jumped on it, right? She was like, well, why wouldn't it have been ethical? And his answer, like, he just kind of looked at her like, I don't understand why you got so excited. It was because I was just the governor of the Bank of Canada. I didn't think it would be ethically right for me to go from that to being finance minister.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, that's not interesting, and like moved on.
Yeah.
So, like, I think we can see like at least some shining through of ethics, like he was saying, right? Like I've already put it in a blind trust and I didn't have to do that for 120 days,
Yep.
Which I'm sure was tempting because I'm sure he wants to buy stock at discounted prices right now.
Yeah.
But yeah,
also, yeah. Also, we got a security clearance in 2 weeks. So like Pierre Poilievre, why haven't you gotten your security clearance?
He had, okay. And this is the thing, right? Like it probably is as simple as I want to be able to yell and scream about things, and I don't want to know if anybody in my party is an asset somewhere, because there was that whole scandal, right, of MPs and who they may or may not be communicating with.
Yep.
So like that was also something that, why as a leader of a party would you not want to know?
Yeah.
That, like, it just shows that he drives me crazy. We can talk more about him in a minute.
Yep. Here's a hint. If it's not Russia, it's China. If it's neither of those, then like maybe India.
Well, India's been a big one, right? Like,
yep.
We haven't heard anything since I can't even remember her name. Ruby Dahala got booted from the leadership race because of connections to Modi, right? She was screaming when it happened that it was unfair and all of the allegations were false. And then we heard nothing.
Yep.
We've literally heard, she was like, I'm going to fight this, blah, blah, blah. And like, after that Power in Politics interview, like there was nothing else. There was no real statements from her. There was no like pushback. It was just like, she's just gone. Poof.
Yep.
Which is also quite telling.
Yep.
So gee, I wonder who she was talking to. Or she found out that like, yes, somebody did give money and she didn't catch it.
Yep.
But yeah, it's interesting how all that stuff plays out. Cabinet. Okay, I'm gonna play this cabinet thing. Where is it? Here. This has also been a thing with the media, and we can talk about it after, but I don't know, like I feel like it's such an old school belief, and I just wonder if it's actually going to matter to anybody who's like a millennial or a Gen Z that's voting. But let's like watch this and then we'll chat.
You keep pointing at the group behind you, your new cabinet. There's only 2 representatives from the West. What's your message to Western Canada?
So the numbers in the cabinet are all necessarily smaller because the cabinet is much smaller. And the cabinet is much smaller because it's focused on the issues that are most important to Canadians, meeting the moment, and the moment is a moment of crisis. We have very capable, exceptional members from Western Canada in there, as well as deputies from the West. But it's a factor when you reduce things down. And I'm Prime Minister of all of Canada, of course, and I'm from the West. And I would note maybe as well, and this is a challenge I think we have. I'll just make a general point. Let's take an example of Chrystia Freeland, okay? Exceptional minister, exceptional public service. Chrystia Freeland lives in Toronto. Chrystia Freeland is from the West. Chrystia Freeland is from Alberta. But people get classified in a way that limits the breadth of experience. I could give you many examples of the pan-Canadian nature of this cabinet.
Last question and follow up.
Okay, and then there's just actually one more. Let's play this.
Speaking of your
too.
cabinet, the front line of your cabinet and the vast majority of your cabinet were all ministers during Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's time. How does this represent change?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is this first thing, smaller cabinet, more focused on action. Everybody in this cabinet is senior. Everybody in this cabinet is senior. So I don't accept the front line and the implication that there's a front line and another line. The second thing is one of the top issues, of course, is the crisis with respect to the United States and the opportunity with respect to trade diversification. So keeping together those individuals who have been on, and now I'm going to use your term, the front line, but the front line in a commercial battle, keeping together those individuals so that we are seamlessly addressing these issues and seizing the opportunities was very important to us, and that's reflected in the cabinet. But of course, it's reflected fundamentally in their capabilities, which are here for the moment.
And on President Trump, what makes you think you personally would be better fit to handle him than Trudeau was? And why do you think he'll have?
Okay, we'll talk about that one in a minute. Yeah, so like I've seen in the last 24 hours that this cabinet stuff is really playing an issue in the media. The size of it, because he's drastically reduced the size of cabinet and combined portfolios sort of together. So the ministers have way more responsibility as well than before. So they're juggling multiple things. And then secondly is that representation stuff, right? Like, oh, you don't have anybody from the West or Atlantic Canada, and like those voices should be there. And then finally, like the representation piece. So I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on this because, and you're like a lot younger than me too. So I just feel like, is this actually going to be an election issue? Like, is this something that people actually care about? Or is this just something that like political nerds from CBC are like talking about? I guess similar to like US norms, right? Yeah. So like it's normal to have a big cabinet so that you can have representation from every province. But like, isn't that the point of MPs?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I don't care. If you have like the choice between an MP from Atlantic Canada who like actually knows something about that portfolio versus some like junior person that just got elected from Alberta, like pick the other person.
Yeah. And like, okay, so my perspective is different because like I'm one of those political nerds who watches the CBC a lot, right? And like,
I mean, so am I.
Yeah. But like from a governance perspective, and like what Mark Carney is doing makes a lot of sense for what he needs to do right away, right? When like we already talked about him getting rid of like the consumer carbon tax, right? So like have things like kind of focused and like cut down, because like for me personally, I'm like, you know, I get it. I understand the representation perspective. Don't get me wrong. I totally get it. But at the same time, like you kind of pointed out, he's from the West. Christopher Freeland was originally like from the West. And like, there are probably other examples. I didn't follow his cabinet, if I'm being totally honest. Like I didn't background check everybody because like I still have a full-time job. But for me, like seeing this like now, I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of like Justin Trudeau's cabinet ministers, which kind of makes me be like, that's weird, right? Because like you said, you'd do something different, but you just cut the cabinet in half, and like now it's a little bit weird.
Got rid of a lot of them actually. He only kept like 2 or 3.
Yeah, okay. I mean, still though, right? And like,
Christopher Freeland, like we talked about before, is like the big one. I think.
And she took a huge demotion, right? So like, for me, like from that governance perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Smaller group, you can make a quicker decision. That's like a little bit more focused, and like you don't have to get 40 people on board. Now, from like a democracy perspective, that's not great. From a like just general like management perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And that's why you tend to see like corporate boards, when a new person comes in, they either shrink or they get basically cut down to only the president and the chair can make decisions. It's a very common thing that happens in corporate boards. But I mean, like Mark Carney did the same thing. Basically, he went in with his like more economic business focused type of perspective. Again, red Tory, cut cabinet in half, and it makes a lot of sense for what he's trying to do right now, which is over the next 2 weeks, kind of like set things up so that going into an election, it makes like he's kind of in a better position, right?
Yeah.
Now, from the like kind of talking a bit more on the representation part, I also just want to mention I think it's really funny that like when he talked about Chrystia Freeland, you can literally see her kind of like, like all of a sudden she like stands a bit straighter and she smiles a bit bigger, and it's like, okay, girl, I get it, but at the same time, like,
I knew everybody would start watching her though.
yeah. So I was like, yeah, you can literally see Freeland.
But he's not wrong, right? Like Chrystia Freeland is the daughter of a Ukrainian Albertan farmer.
Yeah.
And she grew up in a like rural Alberta, like literally on an Alberta farm.
Yep. And like that's that, you know, that's that representation perspective too. Cause like again, we're in Alberta, you know, we have a different perspective than someone from say Atlantic Canada. And back to my friend who's mayor of Lunenburg, or was mayor of Lunenburg, like his perspective is different too. But at the same time, I also know that he and I agreed on a lot of things because he was a governance nerd.
Okay, that's funny. Okay, so as we already saw, the next question he was asked, and I think this is a big one, so we'll move right on into it. Why he thinks he's better to handle Trump was the question.
More respect for you than he did for him.
Look, I'm not going to put myself into to represent that President Trump in any way, shape, or form. President Trump and I, though, we share some experiences. I have been in the private sector. I have worked in the real estate sector. I have done large transactions. I have worked with him during his first presidency at the G20, at the G7. I respect what he is looking to accomplish. And we have built a base through the interactions that we've had, including as of yesterday with the meetings of the Minister of Finance. Well, I'll say, because their roles have slightly changed, Monsieur Champagne and Monsieur Leblanc, and Premier Ford with the Secretary of Commerce, as well as the meetings that the Minister of Foreign Affairs had with her G7 counterparts, including Secretary Rubio. So we are building that base. But in many respects, part of my experience overlaps with that of the president. We'll both be looking out for our countries. But he knows, and I know from long experience, that we can find mutual solutions that win for both.
Thank you.
Okay, so kind of a weird wording to say like I respect what he's trying to accomplish when he's openly said he's trying to annex Canada. Weird choice of words.
Yeah, he needs to work on his how I'm answering a reporter.
Yeah, that was bad. I saw that and I was like, no, you don't say that. I'm mad at America, and you just made it sound like you kind of agree with him, which makes me really mad.
Or at least I think what he was getting at was he understands his perspective.
Yeah, which if he said it like that, I could respect it a bit more. But he did not say it like that. So like bad choice of words.
Yeah, I also don't know if like it's tough, right? Because I also don't know if saying that they have like shared experiences is helpful. Like I
that's the right call.
feel like that whole thing was just bad.
Yeah, I don't think that was the right call at all. Like,
I mean, I guess my question to you is it enough for a reset with Trump? Because I think the big thing that was happening with Trump too, with like tariffs and stuff, is we still had Justin Trudeau as prime minister. Trump like fucking loathes Trudeau.
Yep.
So he's not going to back off. It's sort of a like cut off your nose to spite your face situation.
Yep.
Is the reset with Carney going to be enough to, I guess, like have a new start? Because I think that's kind of where he was going with that, right? There's a new, like, I'm new, we're going to go in and have our talks, which, by the way, he doesn't even have anything set up. We didn't talk about it, but he was asked about that. And that's when he was like, oh, I don't have anything set up with Trump, but I'm going to France. So I guess the question I have out of this is Trump's going to be the headliner in the election. But if Carney wins, which I hope he does, is the new Liberal government going to be hoping to make Trump a non-issue by diversifying enough that it just like they don't have to kind of talk about it? Like, we're going to Europe, we're going to do this and that. So like, I don't really care what he has to say.
I mean,
because that's kind of what I got out of between the earlier comment and then this clip is just kind of like a, eh.
yeah, and that's not, for me, that's not like a great impression, right? And like, we kind of talked, I'm not sure if we talked about this on the podcast already or not, but him going to France makes sense in a way because like you're trying to shore up those relationships with other partners, especially considering that we have a hostile president who's talking about annexing our country, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's kind of a non-starter for him to like, I feel like it's a non-starter for him to set up a meeting with Trump right away and like try to talk him down when Trump can just be like, well, you're unelected with no mandate, right? So
yeah,
like,
I almost wonder, I don't mean to cut you off, but I almost wonder if his like race to Europe is almost like forward thinking in a way of like, okay, well, I have the networking connections that we need in Europe. So if I lose the next election, I can at least set up seeds for Polyev, and then he can like choose to light them on fire, I guess.
Yeah.
But I almost wonder if that's also kind of where his mind is at, right? Like, I already have all these networking opportunities. I'm well known in Europe, so I can like get the meetings that we need. And if he can like get talks well on the way, it'll set up, say, a conservative government in a pretty good position to then take them over if he were to lose.
Yeah. And if that's what he's doing, then like kudos to him, right, for actually being a civic-minded Canadian, because like Lord knows we don't have many of those these days.
Yeah, well, and I do like, I'm really cynical when it comes to politicians. I don't really trust them. But one thing that he has said over and over during the leadership campaign was to the question of like, why are you doing this as an unelected official? And his answer was always like, it was basically like, well, I don't want to do it because I make a lot of money privately, but something has to give.
Yeah.
Which like, I guess kind of speaks to like the arrogance we're probably going to see with him.
Yeah.
But like historically, that hasn't always been a bad thing. Like, look at Naheed Nenshi. He's like super arrogant and people hated working with him, but he got shit done and he knew what he was doing, which is why he was arrogant. So it's kind of this like weird circle. Yeah,
it's a weird dynamic, but at the same time, and like you just mentioned with Naheed Nenshi, like it's the fact that things got done that also made them like, it made the leaders popular, but not necessarily popular to work with. And I can respect Carney for taking that perspective too, of like, okay, well, I know what I'm doing, and like I have the experience and the knowledge to do it, because he does. Again, this is someone with like several years as a public servant at an extremely high level that like came before a career in politics, and like that's, you know, that's huge. Like in and of itself, that's huge. Like, which is why it really frustrates me that Pierre Poilievre is like, you know, who started his career in politics in his 20s, trying to be like, look at how much better I am, right?
Was a paper boy before, which allowed him to put down roots in his community according to his commercial.
I mean, so was I, but like I didn't talk to the people I delivered papers to. The only interaction I had in that entire job was when an old lady yelled at me that she didn't want it anymore. And I was like, well, you got to call the paper to tell them you don't want it, because I just deliver them.
I just think it's so funny that they like put that in his commercial.
Yeah. And like, it's just one of those things too that also comes across as tone deaf, because it's like, yeah, sure, you're a paper boy and then you became a politician with a 6-figure salary and a pension, right? Like, what about your average Canadian who, say, works at Tim Hortons, is a tradesperson, has a middle-ish class salary job, right? Like, have you experienced the struggle of, well, I don't really know what, like, I don't know if my next meal is going to come or not, or like I have to choose between rent and food or things like that, which are very Canadian struggles, especially now.
Yeah.
So like, and to be fair, Carney came from Northwest Territories, so I feel like he probably experienced at least some of that, because like, you know, the territories are historically ignored. So like, you know, but I also then commend him, because like he went from that to governor of the Bank of Canada.
Yeah.
Under Stephen Harper.
From what I've read of his story, like it's not, he didn't grow up rich.
Yeah.
But since we bring up Poilievre, and we've talked a lot about like what sort of he talked about in his in his speech after Carney's, which I'll link below. It was all part of the live coverage of CBC on it, so I'll link that below. But one thing that I want to take out of this is that one thing that was quite alarming and very Trumpian that happened during his speech was he was asked by a reporter about, and I don't even know like who this reporter was, but I remember being like, what the fuck, dude? But this reporter asked him what he thought about the legitimacy of the Liberal leadership race. And his answer was rather chilling, because he responded to the reporter by saying that either the turnout was just pathetically low because there was, 400,000 registered Liberals, or they show something more suspicious. So we're entering like complete Trumpian territory here of rigged elections.
Which, like, why are we okay? First of all, it's a Liberal Party leadership race. Like,
he also won in the first round. Like, they didn't have to do, because it's ranked ballots, right?
Yeah.
They didn't have to go through the ranking. He
Yeah.
just flat out won.
He just blew it out of the water. And like, it's almost as if Mark Carney's really popular amongst his party, right? And like, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, so you're suggesting electoral fraud for a Liberal Party leadership race, when we also have had this conversation, not necessarily you and me in this podcast, but like just other times, where we know that there's been electoral fraud in the United States, in Canada, right? And it tends to not favor the Liberal or like NDP parties, it tends to not favor Democrats, right? So like, the fact that this is coming up again just kind of points out how much Poilievre aligns with Trump. And I'm not sure, I feel like it was Carney who was like, well, I mean, Poilievre worships at the altar of Donald Trump. And I was like,
Yeah, he said that in his speech last Sunday.
Yeah, that was it. So, you have that, and you literally have someone pointing out, it's like, well, this is someone who's almost word for word copied Donald Trump's platform. And then you see those ads come out now, like, Donald Trump says something, Pierre Poilievre says the exact same thing. Donald Trump says something, Pierre Poilievre says the exact same thing. So, like, why are you bringing this? You're the one bringing this into Canada, dude.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go well, but it does make me wonder, like, so the polls, actually, this is a great segue because we can like move right into polling.
Yep.
So the polls are showing, I'm actually just going to share my screen now because I have a bunch of stuff to, so the polls are starting to show, no, not starting. They're basically like neck and neck at this point. And so I just wonder, like, if the Conservatives lose the next election, are they going to start crying like election fraud?
Yep. I mean, I can tell you right now that if they lose, they're absolutely going to start crying election fraud, because like that's what Donald Trump did, right?
I just like I don't like Poilievre at all, but like even I wouldn't have been like, that's a way he's gonna go. But this, like, it shows something more suspicious thing really has got my back up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a huge red flag.
Well, yeah, right. Because let's recap what happened on January 6th, right? You had a whole bunch of rhetoric leading up to it about electoral fraud, and then you had a whole bunch of people shuttled into, Washington, D.C., who then raided the Capitol building, like armed, and resulted in several deaths. And like, no one batted an eye, right? But that's literally the rhetoric that led to that, is like, well, there was electoral fraud. We lost. It was stolen from us. And like, I wouldn't put it past Poilievre to be like, yep, electoral fraud. If he's already calling it on a Liberal Party, like, on a party internal selection process, why can't he just complain about it at the larger scale? And I'm going to tie this back to this whole, like, why won't you get your security clearance thing? Because we know, because there has been a report on it that has been shared with all the MPs who have their security clearance, that people have taken money from foreign powers, right? And that just, again, let's talk about electoral fraud. Let's talk about, like, financial fraud while we're at it, right?
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's where I'm at with Polyev. The polls, as you can see here, have drastically changed. Updated on March 9th. So this wasn't even, March 9th was also the day that the Liberals held their election. So I'm not sure if this was done immediately after or if this came out the morning of. So this was like the most updated polling that I could find. We're going to watch a clip from Nanos, but it's not quite like, I think it was done at the same time. Liberals, if an election was held today, 143 to CPC 156. So we can see like Ontario is really starting to turn around at 59-59. So they're literally neck and neck. The West hasn't changed at all since the last poll. But we can certainly see things changing in Quebec and Ontario. And the NDP just keep losing more seats. They're now down to 14. And it'll be interesting to see what their final seats are at. Right now they have 3 seats in Ontario, and I wonder if we'll see loss anymore if an election is called pretty quickly here. Again, going back to the like ABC, anything but conservative, right? Like I don't generally vote NDP in a federal election. Well, I did last time, but that was because the Liberal in our riding was a complete douche nozzle.
I will fully disclose I am a strategic voter.
Yeah, me too, exactly, right? But I just wonder, like, because it's such an important election, I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see the NDP continue to hemorrhage. But that's where those polls are at. And then let's actually watch Nanos, because I think they did a poll just the other day, and they talk about how they're neck and neck.
The gap between the conservatives and liberals.
Well, Renee, we're certainly seeing some of that political momentum in this latest round of polling. Just 1 point separating the conservatives and liberals. This is a significant shift that we have seen over the past 6 weeks. If you go back a month ago, it was a 16-point gap between the conservatives and the liberals. The last round of polling was at about 2.5 points. We are seeing a tightening in the race, but there are a couple crucial caveats in this. First off, the polling stopped on March 7th. That was prior to Mark Carney officially becoming the Liberal leader. How that change, and eventually Prime Minister, how that change impacts the polling is one thing to watch, especially given, as you were just talking about with Scott, the impact of these Trump tariffs. That has become the top polling issue, according to Nanos. For Canadians, jobs is a close second because those two are so tied together. And the response to that has become a key defining factor, not just of the Liberal leadership race, but of politics in Ottawa as we turn our eyes to a potential national election as well. And in the response to that, Justin Trudeau has been front and center. And as he's been responding, we've seen his personal favorability soar. He has become as likable as he has been in the past 12 months. Setting a 12-month high. That response is really quite telling. And so the question then becomes, how do you separate this Liberal polling, this closing of the gap, from the Trump tariffs and Justin Trudeau's increase in favorability? How much is it attributable to Justin Trudeau? How much of it is attributable to the international situation? And how much is attributable to Mark Carney? Obviously, all three are playing a factor. And so as we move forward in polling, that's going to be the key thing to watch. Do we see a shift in these numbers? Do we see a new trend once Mark Carney takes over officially? Once he's not just Liberal leader, but Prime Minister, when he's the person fronting tariff press conferences and we enter an election campaign? How does this start to switch? That's the thing that most people are going to be looking for.
Yeah. So the poll that he was talking about there is this one. Top 10 issues. Hang on. There we go. So as you can see, like, according to Nanos, March 7th, the Trump-US relations is first, which doubled from the February 7th polling.
Yep.
And then jobs and economy second. And actually, it's quite interesting. Healthcare is third. And I wonder how much of that is related to the annexation of Canada.
Yeah.
And then, because that's even ahead of housing and cost of living and inflation and immigration.
Yeah.
And government.
Well, because especially if you consider the fact that Canada's kind of like, Canadians, I've noticed, tend to pride themselves on the fact that, well, we have healthcare compared to the United States, right? Because like it's something I always see on like Instagram, Reddit, or like whatever social media that I'm on for the day that comes up with like, well, you know what? You Americans have a giant army. At least we have healthcare. You know, we don't die in the streets or whatever. And like, it's a very strange point of national pride, right? Because like, it's something that Canada seems to pride itself on, but a lot of Canadians also seem to be like actively working against at the same time, but then they'll still rub it in Americans' faces like, yeah, we have healthcare. And it's like, you know, it's one of those things where you can't talk against something you're invested in, right? So I think a lot of that, like healthcare moving up, does come from the fact, like, well, if we're annexed or for whatever reason, like Canada loses its sovereignty, you know, even economically, then we lose that, you know, socialized public healthcare. And don't get me wrong, it sucks. Like Alberta is awful. I spent 5 hours in the hospital 3 weeks ago. Or no, it was 4 hours waiting for a doctor with 3 more hours waiting for all my tests, right?
And you were bumped to the head of the line too.
Yeah, because I might have had some disease from Southeast Asia. Like if I didn't
5 hours.
yeah, and I still had to wait 5 hours. So like sorry?
Did they quarantine you?
Nope, they left me right in the middle of it too.
just spread that through the hospital ventilation system.
Yeah, this guy might have malaria. It's fine.
Yeah, and so I just kind of wonder how much of that is that. And I also wonder how much of it is this. So that other poll that he was talking about was this one. So they did, like, Nanos did a whole report on Canadians' view of the US. And there was 4 main findings from it. The first was that 78% of Canadians' view had worsened on the US as compared to a year ago. Canadians are also 2 times more likely to say their neighbors love Canada more rather than less compared to a year ago, which is quite interesting because, like, Americans don't pay attention to shit, but now they are paying attention to Canada. Pessimism and anger were the top 2 emotions Canadians feel towards Americans. And then the 4th finding was 2 in 3 Canadians feel anxious for the future as a result of US diplomatic tensions. Yeah, so
It all makes sense, especially again, like I keep saying, we have a hostile president who keeps talking about annexing our country, right? And it's hard to know because, you know, you go on Reddit, you go on Instagram, you go on whatever social media, and there are people like, no, Canada, you have allies in the States, people are protesting, da 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 da. And it's like the guy is still in the office, right? He's still doing his thing, which is why it's hard to have that, like, that optimism towards our neighbors now. And I even had this, like, actually had a really funny and funny in the, like, kind of funny how this is the conversation we're having type of conversation last night. I was talking to another guy that I train with, and he was like, yeah, I remember a few years ago, there was that rifle amnesty where, like, everyone started handing in their rifles. And then now there's actually a possibility where, like, if something were to escalate, they might just start handing out rifles at the YMCA and be like, here you go, defend your country. And I was like, I hate that you're probably right. But at the same time, I can't fault it as a policy because Canada doesn't have a very strong military in and of itself. But if you have a bunch of really pissed off Canadians and the Geneva checklist, like, what's going to happen? I don't know.
Burtons will be right at the front line.
Yeah, basically.
So we'll keep watching the polls. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Right now, we're not sure when our next podcast is. We'll talk about that after. It kind of depends, I think, if we get an election announcement this week.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, so we'll talk after quickly. But now I just want to talk about some headlines because we don't really have time to, like, get too into the weeds with, like, what's happening in the US, but Trump's still insane. As we mentioned earlier, so one of the big things that happened was Trump was giving a speech at the Justice Department, and he called on imprisoning his opponents. So I'll link the article below, but the first part of the article is President Donald Trump on Friday walked into the Department of Justice and labeled his courtroom opponents scum and corrupt, and the prosecutors who investigated him deranged. These are people that are bad people, really bad people, the president said. The people who did this to us should go to jail. In a rambling speech that that turned dark, Trump vowed to make the agency and retaliate against his enemies. So we're just like full on the Justice Department works for Trump and he's going to put people in jail.
Yeah, we're just full on fascism at this point, like not even hiding it.
So, but Trump derangement syndrome, Rio.
Yeah, we're the crazy ones, right? He's the one saying all of it, but we're crazy.
I don't know about you, but I don't think he should be allowed to put like judges in prison. And he's not very happy with Amy Amy, what's her name?
Barrett Cohen, I think.
Yeah, the Supreme Court justice that keeps voting against him.
Amy Coney Barrett.
Okay, there we go. So that happened. We talked about that earlier, so we don't need to do much else. Ukraine. So a couple things have happened. Well, three major things. I'll roll this all into one. So the US has decided to turn back on Ukraine intelligence. So that's a thing. The ceasefire that I don't think will ever happen. The US has like negotiated a potential ceasefire with Ukraine, but not with Russia. So who knows how that's going to go. And the third thing is that the headline was after Trump's appeal to Putin, he says to spare Ukrainians in Kursk. So Putin said that if they surrender, he'll spare their lives. After Trump, like, what was it that Trump said in a social media post to spare the lives of 1,000 Ukrainians who said they were completely surrounded. There was like, oh, here it is. I have strongly requested to President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre, one not seen since World War II. You strongly requested? How about as the President of the United States, you demand?
Yeah. Like it doesn't come across very well. And you're like, I asked him to do it, which again, we talked about this. We talked about this in a couple of our podcasts before. Like the whole like he might be a Russian asset thing. You asking a foreign leader doesn't come across as you not being a foreign asset.
Right? Like, so that's a thing.
Yep.
Tariffs heated up this week. So I don't know if you saw the stuff with Ontario Premier Ford. But Ford put on the 25% surcharge on electricity, and then Trump got all mad and said that he was going to put up aluminum and steel tariffs to 50%. Then Ford went on CNN and MSNBC and said if he does that, he'll add more to the surcharge. And then eventually Lutnick said that he would meet with Canadian officials. So Ford pulled the surcharge altogether. Now, what pisses me off about this is all of the American media was claiming that Ford folded and caved to Trump when Trump said he was going to put tariffs up to 50%. But like, that's not what happened. What happened was this shit all happened. And then Trump literally, and I forgot to pull it, but I'll see if I can pull it before and put it in the show notes. This all happened. And then Trump literally put out a social media post that said, Ford is a strong man, and then announced that Lutnick would go to the table again with Canada is what happened. Yeah. So that hasn't happened yet. April 1st is when everything's supposed to double. So we'll see.
Yeah. But Ford played the game, right? Like basically he was threatened back, threatened again, threatened back. And then that got the meeting, right? And like, we've seen this with Donald Trump in his first administration too. Like you need to be a strong man. You know, like I remember, I really fucking talked to you about this a while ago. His like handshake thing, right? Where he shake someone's hand, pull them in. Yeah. But Justin Trudeau like pulled Trump in, and all of a sudden the dynamic changed, right? Yeah. So like that's what you're dealing with. And I also want to mention this real quick too. Like Ford threatening to put that on. I saw some people on like, of course, this is fucking Reddit, so like people don't actually understand the depth of the issue. But someone was like, oh well, it only affects like 5 or 6 states. It's not that big of a deal. And then someone who works for I don't know what's called anymore, but Ontario Hydro basically hopped on and was like, no, we provide electricity basically throughout the entire eastern seaboard, Ontario and Quebec. And that electricity connects not just through your grid, but also into Midwestern US. So it's not just 3 or 4 states. It's more like 15 or 16 states.
Electricity, you will freeze.
Yeah. And like, to be fair, Texans already freeze whenever there's a snowstorm. So
right. So that happened.
Yeah.
The CRA has been hacked and hundreds of millions of dollars have been stolen. So that happened.
I saw that.
They're also firing 450 employees, which has caused simple adjustments to now take 45 weeks to process during tax season. Props to CRA. Major measles outbreak in Texas and Ontario. Now, here's what's like not funny, but also kind of funny. Ontario's message is, hey, get vaccinated. Texas's message and the Secretary of Health's message is, hey, here's some alternatives. In fact, CNN posted a headline, misinformation measles on Texas cause outbreak. So
Yep.
I'll post that below. So that's happening right now.
Yep. On the topic of measles, it's also in Alberta now. Edmonton has an outbreak, started like, I think it was literally like 4 days ago, and Calgary had one announced today. So
Are you
thanks.
vaccinated? Are you vaccinated?
I'm vaccinated.
Me too.
Good question. I don't know. I have a lot of relatives I suddenly need to interrogate. So
Yeah, so we'll watch that. Tesla's stocks have crashed. That's
Good.
hilarious. And then finally, the top Democrat, Schumer, backed the Republican spending bill, and it has now kept things open. And people in the US are really fucking pissed about it.
okay, we talked about like spineless Republicans. Let's start talking about spineless Democrats a bit. Because
And that's
like,
exactly what the rhetoric has been this week.
yeah,
It's
because
what the fuck?
yeah, like you just handed someone the keys to the kingdom. Way to go, idiot. Like,
Yeah, Tim Miller was calling for AOC to primary Schumer. Because she seems to be her and Bernie seem to be the only two people that are saying anything.
yeah. Which lines up historically, right? Like we know Bernie Sanders has been Bernie Sanders forever. Like, and AOC is basically like the new generation of that. But you know, we've talked about spineless Republicans. This is just a textbook example of spineless Democrats and them being like literally one and the same. So like, way to go, Schumer. Fucked it up for everybody.
Yeah, right? Like keeping anyway, so that's been the rhetoric. Tim Miller lost his mind on the Bulwark. So if anybody wants to go watch that, that was pretty funny. He just like flipped out and ranted and said AOC should primary his ass. Everything's on fire. These are just a few of the headlines this week. Any like last minute thoughts?
Not really, if I'm being honest, just because like seeing all this and like it's frustrating, right? And like it's hard because it's like you and I have talked about this. Like we're Canadians trying to have a life and trying to remind Americans like, yeah, you know what? We were your closest friends and neighbors. Now you've turned on us and it's all gone elbows up. Like I've never seen Canadians rally around the flag this hard before in my entire life. Like this is the first time. And it's interesting to see, but it's also frustrating to know that like what's caused it is all this like vitriol and turbulence like south of the border. And I know we were talking about Mark Carney today, and I think a lot of what he's facing and a lot of what he's kind of like what he has to understand and what he needs to understand his new job is if he does become prime minister again after an election is keeping Canadians rallied around that flag, right? Because like my neighbor literally behind my house put up a Canadian flag on his part of the fence. And I was like, oh, fuck, I got a Canadian flag in the basement. I got to put it up now, too.
That's
I
what
was like,
last time. Did you put it up?
no, I keep forgetting. And I also don't have my toolbox here. So I was like, okay, well, I'll get to it eventually. But the point is I have the flag. So,
We have patriotism, guys. It'll come eventually.
yeah, that's Canadian patriotism. It'll show up when it's ready, which it did, right? Tariffs happened and everyone started buying Canadian. I was at Safeway the other day and I was like, oh, I need spinach. And then like I looked at the spinach and it's all product of USA. And I was like, absolutely fucking not. And I bought bok choy instead because it was from Mexico. And I was like, you know what? I paid more for this bok choy, but at the very least, it didn't give my money to America. And I had the exact same thought later, but I was like walking through the other aisles because I was like, is this juice Canadian? Yes, then I'm buying it. Is this like
orange juice for you?
Yeah, I can't drink orange juice anymore. It has to be apple juice because apple juice is Canadian.
All right, guys, buy Canadian.
Yeah, buy Canadian.
Legs.
Elbows up, Canada.
Stop talking about Trump derangement syndrome. It's not a thing. Pull your head out of your ass. Those are my final comments.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We'll see you in a week or two.
Thank you for listening.